down 45 fathoms, 270 feet. Still wearing only helmet and corselet, even down nearly 300 feet. If he gets into trouble, he can throw off his helmet and bounce to the surface. It's a risk, but men have done it and lived.
See, they won't attack you going down. They will attack you coming up.
You can stay on top there or you go mad. It's pain.
And here's just a great big grey shadow slid by.
There's a place out there they call the graveyard.
I thought to myself, I better chuck this in. I want to stick around a bit longer. It was too bloody dangerous.
Way up north among the islands, way up in the coral sea, two things always go together.
Today, Thursday Island, better known as TI, is the administrative centre of the Torres Straits. For 100 years, it was also the centre of a thriving pearl shell fishery, running a close second to Broome in Western Australia.
They sing island harmony.
The pearlers' work vehicles were the graceful sailing luggers, which had evolved over time for this specific purpose.
Might be perfect island harmony.
Pearl shell was used in the manufacture of buttons and for colourful inlays in all manner of artefacts. Pearls were a rare byproduct.
Singing the songs we love to sing along, doing the Torres Strait hula.
The area's colourful pearling past still lies strong in the hearts and minds of the island people. Few natives are without family connections, which they express with pride. This is in spite of the fact that pearl shell diving was the most deadly work in Australia. Figures on the number of men lost are legendary. Those who survive all had friends or family members who were maimed or lost their lives in deep waters. These men's extraordinary experiences were all gained in the last great boom in pearl shelling following World War II. The best archival footage in this era was shot by Len Alcock for the Commonwealth Film Unit in 1960 and narrated by Shan Benson in the style of the era.
The harbour of Thursday Island, the smallest of a scatter of islands some 10 miles off the northernmost tip of Australia. It's only a square mile of land, but its good harbour makes it headquarters for the Coral Sea pearling fleet. Everyone navigating Torres Strait must pass through these channels. Captain Cook sailed here, and before him, the man who gave them his name, Luis Vaez de Torres.
For 100 years, Australia was the world's leading pearl shell producer, having had a small beginning in the 1860s.
The pearl beds in the Torres Strait were first discovered by people who were actually up there fishing for beche de mer, which were collected in a very simple way by skin diving. And so the earliest pearl shell diving was done by skin divers as well, in quite shallow waters as a result, 10 metres probably the maximum.
By the 1880s, the shallow beds had been fully exploited, and diving apparatus had to be employed in order for divers to go deeper and stay on the seabed longer. The diving dress, in the form of copper helmet, canvas suit and lead-weighted boots, was invented in England in the 1820s. Air was supplied by a pump powered by 2 men turning handles, a primitive machine which survived on some boats till the 1950s. Up until World War II, almost all divers were Japanese.
The Japanese arrived in the Torres Strait with a real sense of purpose. They came from a quite poor part of Japan, and they were intent on working hard to try and earn their fortune to go back to Japan as wealthy people. And so they very much worked as a team. They worked very hard. They were prepared to do long, hard, dangerous tasks, and they were much more effective, particularly as divers, than most of the other people who, the whole mixture of people from all sorts of races and walks of life that had made up the diving community in Thursday Island up to that point.
Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, here I go on my way.
The Pacific War put an end to pearl shelling for 5 years. Civilians were evacuated from Thursday and Horn Islands, and Japanese nationals were sent south to internment camps. The lugger fleet was dispersed far and wide. When peace returned in 1945, there was pent-up demand for shell, and the beds had been spelled for 5 years. The future looked promising. Born in Tasmania in 1924, Dick Sonners represents the adventurer type of pearl sheller. Following 5 years in the Merchant Navy and with the American Small Ships Division, Dick entered the industry through a chance encounter in Townsville in early 1946.
And I met this fellow who was a professional diver. He'd done experimental Navy work before the war. John Childs, well known. He said, look, if you've got any money, he said, buy a boat and get up to Thursday Island and get stuck into pearl, learn to do the pearl shell trade. He said the Japanese ran the industry before the war, and he said, of course, now they're out of it, and it's up to us. He said, we're at the, on the first rung of the ladder in a brand new industry, and there is a market for mother of pearl shell. So that really appealed to me to get back into small craft, sailing craft. The Lockhart River Mission was selling their lugger. They had it replaced with a brand new vessel called the Torres Herald, which is very well known in northern waters of Queensland. It was an old pre-war lugger belonging to the Sinclair Company of Thursday Island, and had no provision for an engine in it. It was just strictly sail.
Without an engine in his lugger and using only an old hand-operated air pump, Dick's chances of a successful pearl shelling venture were limited. Dick decided to sell his lugger and take up an offer of a trip to China. Meanwhile, others had been more successful.
Freddie Chin Soon of TI, he is the first diver out of Thursday Island in '46, a mechanised diver with the old established air compressor and all that. I think he worked for the Bowden Company, and I think his lugger was the Minerva. And just before I left to go to China, he came in with over 2 ton of shell. Well, that really created news on Thursday Island. And I wondered at the wisdom of myself from selling the lugger to just to do a trip, And I didn't realise, because I'd only been getting a few hundredweight every neap. But I was only learning. I was a real rookie.
The ukulele waltz at the Mangrove Hotel. I remember.
Winner of numerous national awards, including 2 arias, Seaman Dan is a man of mixed Jamaican, Polynesian and Melanesian heritage who has gained recognition as a singer-songwriter of island and maritime songs. However, at the age of 19, his ambitions were quite different.
I don't want to be decky all the time, all my life. I'll try to put the helmet on, and when I got the opportunity to put the helmet on, I grabbed it with both hands and I said yes. 1949 I was skipper of a pearling vessel.
Wrench Mills was born to be a diver. His grandfather, James Mills, was a Samoan who arrived in the Torres Straits in the 1880s and took up pearl shell diving. He settled on Nagi Island and eventually owned a small fleet of luggers. Most of his 8 sons became head divers and skippers. Wrench followed in the family tradition, working his way through the ranks to become skipper of the lugger Fenia at the age of 23.
You don't want to go on the boat as a crew. You want to be a skipper on the boat, You could be somebody, on the boat. So that's why we all try our best, to be a skipper and do something worthwhile,
While seeking the reason why so many divers died, we need not look too far. And Wrench has hinted at it already.
But it was a race. Everybody was in it. Everybody was competing.
Well, you got to have that go. You want to do it, you want to be there, so you got to push. You got to push. And I really worked my butt off to beat the experienced divers.
Those uniquely human traits of pride and prestige are comparatively harmless when pursued by shore dwellers. But when carried out on the pearling grounds, it's a different matter altogether. All divers suffered the bends at some time, though most attacks were not fatal.
Well, I came up, I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden, mine seemed to wander, and I could bloody something like, my memory sort of just left me. Just boom, like that. I had the bends very, very bad. I didn't know what happened. I opened my eyes. I was seeing this fellow just looking at me, sort of thing, and I came to my senses. 25 fathoms I went, but we didn't have the dress on.
Because once you get on deck, and if you fall down, that's it, you got the bends. They call the bends, diver sick.
Well, the bends is a phenomenon that occurs when a diver breathes any gas underwater, but more appropriately nitrogen gas. And the longer the diver stays underwater and the deeper the diver goes, the more nitrogen is absorbed by the diver's tissues, and it stays in the tissues until it comes out during the ascent. Now, if the diver stays too long or goes too deep, that nitrogen comes out in the body in the form of bubbles. It comes out of solution, and that actually forms in the joints of the body, and that's where the diver then reacts by bending their arms and legs into a contorted position because of the immense pain, and that's where the disease gets its name from. It's the bends.
In the early days of dress diving, the death toll was frightful. In the worst year, an estimated 10% of divers lost their lives. In the 1893 season, 25 divers died at the Darnley grounds alone, which were the deepest and deadliest grounds in the Straits.
They certainly lost a lot of divers. They were diving at a time when diving wasn't a well understood science. They didn't understand decompression very well. I think the Japanese in particular weren't willing to understand what was known of diving science at that time. Most of that knowledge came from the British Navy, probably wasn't passed on to the Japanese divers particularly well, so they learned by trial and error. They came from a part of Japan where life and death was pretty commonplace, I suspect, and they weren't so worried about losing lives along the way as perhaps we are in the modern world.
And a lot that died from the bends, well, they're buried at the cemetery there, full of them. Yeah, if you go there and you see the grave, it's unreal. Then you got some of the islanders that came from Pacific Islands. They come from Lifu, Tana, a place called Tana, and a few other places. If you go up to the cemetery, you will see on the headstone where they come from. 22 years of age, 18, 23, but very young in those days.
Oh, you can't stay on top there or you go mad. It's pain. When you get both legs, move. And besides, when you get two hands, oh, not good.
And the only way to get relief is to go back into the water under pressure. And as the bubbles form in the joints of the body and other areas, the only way to reduce the volume of that bubble was to put it back under pressure so that the pressure compressed the bubble and allowed blood to flow within the body, easing the pain and removing many of the symptoms.
Terrible. You can't do nothing. They have to carry you out, put the helmet on you, strap them down, just let you out, you know. Stop you so the helmet won't come out and put you down. But as soon as you get to that limit, you feel better. You know, you come out with, oh nice, lovely. You signal them. Sometimes you're too bad, someone have to take you down. Another diver take you down and leave you there when you feel ready. So he leave you there and he go out. Yeah.
I worked on the principles of the Admiralty tables for staging, but being the diver myself, I was able to go by feel a lot, and I was able to eliminate those a lot. Like with Admiralty tables, if you do a dip, say, of 25 fathoms, you only do one of those for half an hour in a day. You don't do any more diving till next day. Well, we used to do 3 or 4 dives a day. And I always doubled up on, instead of taking, say, half an hour to come up during our work day, the last dip for the day would be double stage.
There is no shortcut. Anything over 10 fathoms, you've got to stage, even if it's only for 5 minutes. So we'll be working 18 to 25 fathoms. Your first staging level is at 15 fathoms. You hang there for 5 minutes. Next staging level is at 10 fathoms. You hang there for 10 minutes. And at 5 fathoms, you hang there for 15 minutes. And the most critical is at 2.5 fathoms. You hang there for 20 minutes.
Following other travels and adventure, including a stint at crocodile shooting and trochus shelling, Dick Sonners found himself in Darwin in 1951 pearl shelling using his own 30-foot cutter, in which he was to have the worst experience of his life.
Well, this was going back to when I had the little 30-foot cutter, and was working out from Goulburn Island, and with the usual southeast winds. There's supposed to be a bed of shell out at New Year Island. That's the furthermost landmass of land of Australia. And all right, I went down there in about 24 fathoms of water, and it was very heavy. I could feel the pressure. And I got on the shell, picked up quite a quantity of shell, 300 or 400 weight in the couple of hours was there. And but the winds increased, and there was no decent anchorage there. It was open ocean. There was no anchorage there. And so we came right back, and I think we got in behind a little island called McClure Island. It's out from the coast of the Croker Island. And we sheltered there. And while I was there, I started to feel these pains in the shoulders and that, and until they got severe. And it was just coming on dark. I had to go on stage. But with staging, to get rid of the nitrogen in your bloodstream, the nitrogen bubbles, you had to go back to the same pressure where you got sick from. Well, that was 24 fathoms out at New Year Island, and it was too rough, and it was black at night. We couldn't get there, and we punched out heading in that direction, just going north, until the boat couldn't take it anymore, and we were getting belted. And we threw the lead. There was no depth sounders in those days. We took a lead sounding. It was only 17 fathoms. So I thought, right, we'll go. I couldn't stand the pain anymore. So they dressed me up and put me down, and she was a long night. It's not only me, it's the boys on deck. You see, they're putting up with that weather, and they've been bucked and tossed around, and they're hanging on to me. And this was really tough, because the tender, I had the paralysis in the base of the spine. I was paralysed in both legs, and he was trying to hold me off the bottom because I couldn't walk. I was being dragged, and he was taking my full weight, weights and all on, you know. From the night before, from about, I think, time they put me down at 9 or 10 o'clock at night through to the following evening. I was being staged.
Wrench Mills was highly motivated to maintain his prestigious position as head diver and skipper of the lugger by lifting a lot of shell. He was obviously pushing his luck. He has vivid memories of one particular night in the Gulf of Carpentaria, which demonstrates one of the dangers of diving with helmet only.
I was sick almost every night, with my two legs, arms, and the bend. So I went down that night. They put me down that night. And I went down with this anchor rope. They slacked me down, and as soon as I stopped, the tides that pushed me away from that rope, I hang on for dear life. I couldn't hang on no more. I have to let go. And when I let go, the tide just swept me and almost take out the helmet when that rope tied up top. Helmet almost come off of my head. And I hang on for dear life. With this hose around my arm, another one around here, that one keep my head in that helmet. But I was like this. I try and pull that helmet back, And I signal and they shake, say, no, stay there. And I signal, come up, pull me up. After they think, oh, this fellow in trouble, pull him up. Pull him up, and I walk straight up, pull me up, and they tell, I was still sick. They want to put me back there. I said, no way, I'm staying here. I've been a lot of time down, almost every night when we are diving. I spend my time down. Me and my brother and a lot of others. At daytime we still work, We still work.
Being put back down into the sea at night to relieve an attack of the bends was an extremely harrowing experience, one which some were reluctant to do in spite of the intense pain.
Boys that frightened of going down at night, we put a empty drum, and cut the top off, fill them up with water, put them in there, or fill the dinghy up with water and let them lay down in the water dinghy there. Yeah.
And did that help? No,
not much, but it just keep you cool. You're cold and you stay all night. Yeah.
Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, one may dismiss these frequent cases of the bends as carelessness or over-ambition, but other factors were also at play.
If you hurt your leg, you're a diver, you fall down here somewhere, you get drunk and play up. When you go out in the deeps, you'll get the bends in the same part of your body. If you hit your elbow or your leg, then we got to stage you, look after you. Might stage you for 2 to 3 hours.
Down into the frightening Darnley deeps, with its uneven floor and great caverns into which a man may fall. One man has died here already this year. Straight to the bottom. There is danger here, but worst of all, the water itself. Its pressure kills.
Wrench Mills experienced the Darnley deeps 7 years before this film was made.
Until we went to the deep, and then you feel a little bit frightened now because we've never been down the deep before, A lot of people, Japanese, been diving before, a lot of them got killed there. And we were not too sure how to go about it, but there's a lot of shell. The pressure is too strong, You can even feel your finger, crackling when you go down. It's dark and deep. Yeah, but a lot of shell, pearl shell. The more you go down, the more shell you see because they've fallen sort of roll off the top and lay down. There's plenty of shell. Yeah. The more you go down, the more you get sort of going black out and come back up again and go again. Yeah.
narcosis means drunkenness or stupor. And what happens is, when the diver breathes air, 80% of the air is composed of nitrogen. And nitrogen affects the diver depending upon the depth you go, but from 30 metres or 4 atmospheres and beyond, it gives the diver a mild, pleasant, drunken sensation. All is really okay with the world, and it's quite a happy, euphoric place to be. And if the diver still continues to dive below 40 or 50 metres, then what it can affect is the lower nerve centres of the brain. In this area, in fact, the diver loses inhibitions, can even forget what they're doing, and can form a sort of drunkenness or stupor.
I went down 60 fathom, and as far as I went, because we didn't have rope. We only have our lifeline, 60 fathom, and I went down that far, but they have to join up another rope, because I was still going down, and they stopped me, stop, pull me back up, you know.
And if you think that at 50 metres the effects of nitrogen narcosis can be specific, if you think of about 50 fathoms or 90 to 100 metres, then the effects can be actually fatal. And very few people will ever survive an exposure of nitrogen narcosis to that depth. Only today they dive to those depths when they're supported by underwater wet bells, they're supported by dry bells, and the decompression is undertaken in a lovely deck chamber where all of the pressure changes are controlled in an exacting environment. There's a life support technician, and the divers have environmental controls of temperature. Their gas is filtered, it's far better than it was in the old days, and they have adequate supplies of gas to breathe. When one looks at what the early pearl divers did, the equipment they had, going to 50 fathoms is a fantastically dangerous thing to do. It takes an incredible degree of guts, it takes an incredible faith on your equipment, the boat, the marine environment that you're working in, the crew that you're working with, knowing full well that even if one thing in that chain of life support goes wrong, there is nothing to help you out, nothing to get you back to the surface. That was a very gutsy thing to do, and one I think that most people would not even consider contemplating.
The diver communicated with his tender by a system of tugs on the lifeline.
When we down, when we want to come up, they pull one. So it pull you up. And you pull 1, 2, you maybe for more air. In your 1, 2 shake for another thing, you know, maybe say you bag up. You to send all your bag full and you want to send them up. So 1, 2 shake. Doesn't matter, you're down in 65, and you pull on that line, that fella up there holding that line, he get all that signal clear. Yeah. And for all these things, like something else, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe to go to your right. Or 1, 2, 3, 4 to your left. All these signals, you know.
You must keep that left hand. If you're right-handed, you pick up all that on your lifeline all the time. It's called your lifeline. Never let that go. And your right hand is for picking up pearl shells. So you got to be very careful what you do, because you've got all your lead weights on your corselet, and the helmet is heavy enough to tip you over. Once you get tipped over, all the water comes into your helmet, and you got to let the helmet go and start swimming for the surface.
But the tender is the chap that holds the lifeline, diver's lifeline. He's responsible. And the stern tender is responsible when the stern diver is not there. Stern diver is the skipper of the boat, and stern tender is the second in charge. Then you got your forward diver and your forward tender, like that, you know, they got.
I think a key thing that did occur after the war was that the Torres Strait Islanders had been given much more of a sense of their own autonomy during the war. They served quite an active part in the Torres Strait during the war, and so after the war they took a much more active role in the industry, and so the islands each started fishing rather more seriously, and we saw the emergence of some. They weren't companies in the sense of the Western companies, but the great fishing clans like the Nonas of Badu Island really came to the fore during that period. and ran quite large fleets of boats, much larger in fact than the companies did, and most of the divers during that era of course were Torres Strait Islanders as well. So the industry really shifted radically after the Second World War. It didn't go back to being the same kind of industry that it was before. It was much more dominated after the Second World War by the Torres Strait Islanders. Even the boats that were run by companies, by Burnsville and by Bowden's, were using Torres Strait Islanders as their crews and divers during that period.
When the Japanese divers were released from internment at the end of the war, some returned to Japan. Others, like Kirakachi Shibasaki and Tom Fuji, who had married island girls, returned to their families and resumed their roles as respected members of the community. Islanders and a few Europeans were trained to fill the gap left by the departure of the Japanese. Tom Foster was at sea 15 years, 7 of them on his father's lugger, Charm. He remembers his first dive very well.
Did my ears in the first dive before they burst, as I was getting something expanding in your ears, and then when it went, you're right then.
You can clear all the your ears and so on, and it's only the initial dives, and especially for a newcomer, and is to press your nose hard against the face glass and blow, and your ears will pop. Crew boy or the tender is, if he's on the ball, he'll warn a new diver, tell him what to do.
I worked 25 fathom, just with a helmet. You only got about that much water just below your chin in the helmet. You can't bend over, you've got to stoop to pick up the shell. You aim ahead before you get to the shell. You see the shell, but you make your line just enough movement to get to the shell and pick it up in one run, You don't walk, sometimes you sprint with a strong current.
Tom was diving with helmet and corselet only, without the cumbersome canvas suit and lead boots. This was an innovation introduced when the islanders took on most of the diving following World War II. It allowed the diver much freer movement when collecting shell. It also allowed the diver to throw off the helmet should his lifeline or air hose become fouled at the bottom. But it also had disadvantages.
A young diver lost his life. He slipped out of the helmet. Not like in the suit, you're strapped in, you can't come out. But with the helmet and corselet, anything happens like that, you can just slip out of your helmet. And he must have had a heart attack or something underneath, and he slipped out of his helmet. And we went looking for the body. There was 30 pearling vessels working in the same area. It's a big area. And we couldn't find his body. So we sailed back to TI in funeral procession, one lugger behind the other, full sail back to TI. We're about 25 miles away from TI. We sailed all night.
The number of luggers engaged in the Queensland pearl shelling industry peaked in 1904, when 350 vessels were registered. Now, almost faded from collective consciousness, the pearling industry was an extremely colourful but often tragic facet of Australian history. Fantastic tales of divers' bends being taken by sharks and giant gropers, divers having their feet caught in giant clams, stolen pearls and murder were great fodder for novelists. But a number of more scholarly books and at least 2 movies have been based on the industry. The best known is the 1953 movie King of the Coral Sea, directed by Lee Robinson and starring the inimitable Chips Rafferty, with a young Bud Tingwell and Rod Taylor. It features the best footage available of authentic working luggers racing under full sail.
Come on, use him! You'll never make me back to Sandy Island! Don't use the mill! Sorry for ritual! Rocky, lay low! Stand by your main sheet!
The plot may have been fictional, but the boats, diving gear and issues are authentic Thursday Island of the period.
Drop your production costs. We operate cheaper than any other pearling company in Australia. You can still work cheaper. For a start, simplify your diving methods. The helmet and corset's the best method there is. We've proved that in the past. In the past, yes, but now... And Thursday Island's the only area where the helmet and corset's used, and we still take the most shell. But your output per man is still low. I did a bit of underwater work for the British Navy during the war. We used the aqualung gear they developed for the frogmen. That fancy stuff might be all right for Navy frogmen, but they're not in the pearling business, Mr. Merriman. Right, Jack. Okay, Ted, don't go frightening any sharks. You gotta keep straight up and down in this gear, otherwise the water will shoot up inside the helmet. Dangerous. It's the safest and fastest method of shell diving there is, Mr. Merriman. If the diver gets into trouble, he can slip out of the helmet and swim up. In deep water, you've got to be very, very careful.
Another diving innovation was the half dress, which was a canvas diving suit cut off at the waist. This combined the advantage of the buoyancy of the full suit with the mobility of diving with helmet only.
I've seen maroon divers, they use the full suit over there. It's cumbersome. You get dragged behind the vessel and you just pick up the shell that's in front of you. But with the half suit, you've got free movement. You can zigzag. You cover more area and you pick up more pearl shells that way.
I prefer the half dress. You can blow yourself up. It helps you carry your weight, the weight of your shell. Otherwise, if you've only got a helmet on, you've got the dead weight of your bag full of shell, and you can't come up. You're relying on the tender to take your bag of shell away and to pull you up.
Diving was only carried out during the neap tides, which are a 5-day period of weaker currents following the new and full moon. The divers had to make the most of those few days each fortnight.
They all work together. When the neap starts, that's it. They all go together. When it's over, one by one they come in. Some like to work there and bend down. You get that water dirty, you're going to look like that to pick a shell. Yeah. Well, sometimes you get that right through the neap. You're bending down, crouching down to look where the shell is.
Get up early in the morning, 5 in the morning, start to get your diving gear ready, undo all the stuff, all your ropes and your air hose, your diver hose, and clean the helmet, face the glasses, and you go straight down the ladder, boom, down you go. But as soon as it's bloody daylight, at the old ground, you don't get the bends there, so not very deep. They can work bloody 6 in the morning to bloody 6 in the afternoon. Just sunset, all come up and sort of thing, and yeah. It's a bloody hard life, I tell you, it was. Really hard, work hard for what we...
To maintain production, the luggers put out to sea at the beginning of every neap, regardless of the prevailing southeast winds. When the Commonwealth Film Unit shot this footage in 1960, they were fortunate to have calm weather, but it gives a false impression of normal sea conditions. In Australia's far north, the southeast winds blow briskly for much of the year, often blowing up to 20 and 30 knots, making conditions very uncomfortable on board.
Most of the time you only work 2 divers because the wind is so strong that you've got to hold the head of the boat into the seas. And we've always, the mizzen sail, or what we call the mainsail sail in the north, they don't call it mizzen and foresail, it's main and foresail. And before you leave anchorage, that sail is up, usually with a double reef. And that's just to hold the head of the ship into the seas and the wind. It can be slacked off. If you slack it off, that allows the bow of the boat to swing off, and that leaves a spread between your 2 divers. But in real rough weather, you've got to almost head into the wind, and she's drifting sternways, And one diver, if you've got two divers down, one can get in front of the other or stir up muddy water. So that's when, you know, it's really blowing hard. But we've stayed out in those conditions. And of course, there's no running for shelter of a night. We've anchored in those seas, and where it's just workable, but the waves are cresting, and we're way out from any side of land, and the seas will come over. You hear them rumbling down the deck of a night. The boat might swing off, and one will comb over the bow, and you'll hear it lumbering over your head, over the decks, but that is when it's really bad. But there's no running for shelter.
Pearl shell were commonly found on mud bottom, but there were exceptions.
And sometimes you could see, if it's a muddy bottom, you could see where the shells turned over. When the tide changed, it turned over the other way to feed the other way. They open up, and then when the tide changed again, it swings back, turns back the other way, and feed again.
It's down on the natural bottom, and it's usually deep. It's mud. Well, what we call too in some places, garden bottom, where everything's growing, is flourishing. There's seashells, there's bailey shells and helmet shells, and there's sponge and whip and fan, and there's pearl shell amongst it.
The time spent in midwater staging could be up to 1 or 2 hours, depending on depth, but to the suspended diver, it seemed a lot longer.
Just sing your songs.
I keep thinking of pearl shell and parties. Get with your mates, meet your mates ashore, get a guitar and have a bit of a sing-song. Whenever we come into port, the TI girls, they'd put a party on for us, and it's usually at the town hall, a dance night sort of thing. So it was very good.
Doing the Torres Bay hula, each one a story to tell. The beauty of music in motion, and that sweet, sweet frangipani smell. Cesar, Ina and Rita, swaying as they sing along. From Key to Sydney and Europe, traveling with a smile and a song. Hello, Cocky is how they tune the ukulele. It just might be perfect island harmony, making me smile.
The Torres Strait was quite a frontier society in the late 19th century, 1880s, 1890s. All sorts of people from all walks of life came through there. A lot of people from the Philippines, from Indonesia, as it's now known, and from the South Sea Islands particularly came in, and they intermarried a lot with the Torres Strait Islanders. So almost from the start, the Torres Strait Island society and community was starting to change.
Cousins, Omar Binawel and Budin Ahmet, were dive tenders during pearling's last hurrah. They represent the mix of races and cultures which make Thursday Island the colourful place it is.
Our grandfather came from Johor Straits, Singapore. He was a Dayak, like an Aboriginal of that land.
Also of Malay and Islander descent, Bill Anderson was born on Thursday Island in 1927 and orphaned at the age of 9.
Yeah, also most of my people is mixed race Malayan, who shall say from Badu Island. There's a lot of Malayan divers there too.
It's all like a big multicultural up here. We call it company rice. When you make a rice, you're mixed up with fruit and vegetables and whatever. Say
everything in
it. Meat, different type of meat. Company rice, we call it. Oh, it's good.
But all the different nationalities,
yeah.
Everybody seems to get on, get on
Everybody's
well,
yeah.
No arguments.
No arguments.
When Bill Anderson was growing up in the 1930s, he saw things a little differently.
Japanese divers, and they used to have their own boarding houses. Japanese on one end of TI and the Malayans on the other end, you know. They didn't get on really sometimes. They have a bit of a fight and pull a bloody knife out. Yeah, that's bloody way back. And that's, you know, the Malayan married into Torres Strait Islanders, yeah.
Izzy Shibasaki's father was a Japanese diver who, like many of his countrymen, settled on Thursday Island and took an island bride. Izzy also became a diver against his father's wishes.
Actually, he didn't want us to dive. Look at it that way. Because he knows it's a dangerous job.
It takes a certain person to adapt. You've got to be very tolerant, and yet with a crew you've got to be very firm too. There can only be one skipper on a boat. And all mixed race. There's fellas, we used to refer to them as half-castes, and there was no offence, they took no offence at that at all. Like here in the modern day, you've got to be so correct. All this indigenous business was half-castes or natives in those days. You're living and sleeping and eating on a limited area of boat. Well, I had a 30-foot cutter for about 4 years, and then a lugger of, say, 53 foot she was, and I would have, say, a dozen of a crew, all mixed race of the world.
Both secular and sacred musics are popular with Torres Strait Islanders and are as eclectic as the society is multicultural. Many of the song lyrics feature the luggers' crews at work and play. Originally, the instruments were quite basic.
It's just a drum and a bamboo with the two sticks. We call them lumut. And then when I was young, the guitar comes. Guitar was made by, the first guitar was brought from here by Nabil Cuddy. We compose our own songs. We get a love song composed by Murray Islanders, and we compose all the songs. We even compose all the songs when you work on the reef. The song can tell you that you were there on this island, in Cairns, Townsville, Mackay. So we compose all our songs, and the boys play the guitar. But the old country song used to be arrived. It was very beautiful songs.
As a young fellow, my inspiration, Mum Dan always had one of those wind-up gramophones, and she always had Tex Morton records. So as an 80-year-old, Tex Morton was my inspiration in those days. Charlie Abbott is a good guitar. He plays a Hawaiian guitar. He was another inspiration for me. This was when I was a teenager then.
Oh, sailing the southeast wind. Oh, Sake Kubanu. Oh, Sake Wagwamli.
The typical Thursday Island pearling lugger, built prior to 1940, was a fine sailing craft. In the early days, sailing races were held regularly. This silver cup on display at the Horn Island Museum was won by the Charm, owned by Tom Foster's grandfather, Thomas Farquhar. By the 1950s, most luggers were fitted with motors, with sails used as auxiliary power and for keeping the bow up to the wind as the vessel drifted over the grounds. On one occasion, the Grafton's motor broke down off Deliverance Island, forcing Seaman Dan to sail the 85 miles back to Thursday Island.
And her speed under full sail would have been 9 knots, and it's pretty fast for a pearling lugger, because they built and designed as a working vessel, not as a racing vessel. And she was a good fast sailor. I found that out. That's the only time I've had to use all the sails. But it was an exhilarating feeling. you hit the sea and you get the spray all over the deck, and it's a wonderful sensation. You know, you know you're alive.
Nitrogen narcosis and the bends were not the only hazards that could spell the end for a diver.
Out in the Darnley Deeps, outside of a place, Calico, Sayo, Kenoki, Small Mary, and there's a place out there they called the Graveyard. There's a lot of Japs way back in the 1880s when the pearling started. The Japs went out deep in those days, or after that. And there's a lot of them died, and the helmet got caught in these high-rise place at the bottom. The helmet and the body's still down there.
Well, it's the danger down the deep there. It's that reef, underwater reef. And if you see that reef, sometimes you don't see them until you're almost under that place, or you feel your lifeline grind. You know it's that coral up on the reef. Sometimes you don't look at the reef, but you feel that lifeline. You hose tight, get pulled back. So you know something wrong come up. So they pull you up until you see the reef, then you signal left or right and go back down again.
By the use of signals, Wrench was able to direct the lugger away from the reef. But in earlier times, when luggers were without engines and at the mercy of the wind and tide, death by snagging on an underwater reef was far more common.
The current would drag them under the reef, and then they get caught there, and then the air hose would snap, their lifeline would snap, and that's their coffin. That's happened to a lot of divers there in the early days. If I had a diver's helmet, I'd take my helmet off to them. They were very courageous divers. They were experimenting. They opened the road for us younger divers.
Superstitions are a maritime tradition.
Some you can't do this, you can't do that, you know. And some of them you can't go diving unless you say a prayer before you dive, that sort of thing.
Never sail on a Friday. That was one. That was the main one. What we could do, if we was this is in TI particularly and Darwin, but in TI there was more of them, and they could put up a weightier argument, but I went along with it. What they could do, and they did among themselves, the Torres Strait Islanders was in charge, and all the family affair on the boat, was if they wanted to sail on the Friday, they're catching tides or was important, they would pack up, they'd bring the dinghy, tip the dinghy up, lash it all down on deck, everybody on board, all set to go on the Thursday evening. And then they'd go on anchor. They'd steam off, all sail up, and they'd go on anchor somewhere. And they've started their voyage. And then from there, they could continue on Friday. But they wouldn't leave Thursday Island on a Friday. Well, I carried on the same in Darwin. We never left on Friday. You could anchor around behind the point and then carry on from there. It worked. I never got into it. I didn't have a shipwreck.
Oh, you get some big sharks, 14, 16 footer. They're the ones you could be careful, especially coming up. They'll attack you coming up. So you got to keep walking if they follow you. And try to frighten, well, the only way you can frighten them with more air, the bubbles. They frighten the bubbles.
We used to take a shell out of the bag and hit the helmet, make a noise, and we'd pull the ask for more air. 2 pulls for more air on the lifeline. You'd ask for more air and pull the helmet down as far as you could, and then you just lift it up like that and reach a lot of air go out, and the shark would run away. Yeah.
If you signal more and they want to know what's wrong, you give them 7. That's signal for shark danger. And then you just shake, if you're okay, just shake your line like that, and everything ceased, and you just carry on the way you were.
So shark, oh, he would have been about 50, 60 feet away from me, and the visibility was so good. And he came straight at me like a saw shark out of Hades. And I'm trying to duck in the helmet, and there's nowhere to hide. He came straight at me, and I'm sweating in the helmet. And about 20 feet away from me, about 10 feet, he stopped abruptly, turned around and swam away. I was only down there for half an hour. I had to come up on deck. I was shaking.
They talk about sharks and gropers and stuff like that, and there's snakes underneath there too.
Well, I used to catch them when they come near. They'd go for the helmet too. They'd come up from the bottom, bang on your face glass and give you a fright. So I used to catch them and tie them in a knot and then let them go. And when they surface, when they swim to the surface, and the way they look, that's the way the wind's going to come tomorrow. And it's always right.
The pearling fleet comes into Thursday Island, where Francis Sabatino's lugger is tied up to unload a record haul, 22 tons of gold lip and silver lip. The rigging is hung with oyster flesh cut from the shells. "22 tons of shell mean a great deal to the people of Thursday Island.
Omar Binawel was forward tender on the Antonia when this segment was filmed in 1960.
One of the deep gun divers I work with, his name was Francis Sabatino, and I worked on a pearling lugger called Antonia, A99. It was 1960. We picked up 75 tons. We broke the record. And his cousin, Byron Samuel, Uncle Byron Samuel, he picked up 65 tons on the pearling lugger Anarchy. The deepest we worked then was 50 fathoms. Out in the Darnley deeps.
This increase in catches was not due to an increase in shell stocks, but to improved compressors and working methods. The demand for shell was underpinned by its use in the manufacture of buttons. By the late 50s, plastics were making rapid inroads into this market. The downturn in the early 60s caused luggers to be sold off or laid up and neglected. Fortunately for some operators, pearl culture farms were being established in the area. The requirement for live shell to stock the pearl farms kept a reduced number of luggers in employment through the 1960s. The final blow to the industry occurred in March 1970, when the oil tanker Oceanic Grandeur struck a rock near Thursday Island. Though not a large spill by world standards, the oil, and particularly the detergents used to disperse it, was blamed for a disease which caused huge mortalities on the pearl farms. Only 2 farms survived the epidemic, and today the brood stock for those farms are bred in hatcheries.
The ukulele waltz at the Mangrove Hotel. I remember the music so well. We'd all be assured when springtide arrived. Instead of the ocean, the dance floor we'd ride. There was a bassman and a mandolin.
In spite of the hardships, the men involved look back on the pearl shelling era with a great sense of pride at being involved in that colourful past which the islanders so strongly identify with today.
Some of those men in those days, they were big men.
They were big, yeah.
Strong men. Some of the things they'd done, you wouldn't believe it. They could lift up a sack of pearl shell, no problem. Put it on their back.
Nobody couldn't stay home that time. You couldn't stay home. That's the only job you got.
When you were young, I said, when you were young, you take anything that comes along. I was never, I was always look for work. I never been in a bloody dollar in my bloody life. As I just said, when you're young, you go and you look for work and whatsoever, and you bloody enjoy it. The money was small, the wages was bloody small.
Oh, we enjoyed ourselves.
We enjoy our life.
Never arguing.
We taught discipline, respect the elders, how to take orders, how to look for food. In those days, everybody together, one big family.
It was a raid. Everybody was in it. Everybody was competing, especially in Darwin.
Sometimes you can stay for 6-7 hours. It all depends how bad. Then you got to work early hours in the morning again. You might have 2 hours sleep. That's what I say. We were men in those days. Wooden ships and iron men.
Being with my old mates, we talk about the old times, the old days when we were young, and we have a big laugh. We talk about our near fatalities and our lucky escapes, and we laugh about it.
I can't tell you why we go back, but I really enjoy the time you work on the boat.
Good and hard. Good and hard.
It's terrific, wonderful way of life. Yeah.
I wish I was younger, mate. I'd go and have another go. Yeah.
It just might be perfect island harmony.